Hey everybody, welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk. I'm your host, Vincent. I am waiting for our co-host, Matt. He'll be joining us any second. We're going to break down the good, the bad, and the campy when it comes to The Fly. No, not Cronenberg's Fly. We covered that in a previous episode. This is the OG 1958 sci-fi version of, ultimately, this short story. Hey, Matt. I'll let you on in here. So we just recently watched this, if not for the first time in a long time. So we're excited to talk about it. How you doing, Matt?
Good. How are you?
Excellent.
Good.
I've been watching some of the World Series starts tonight. So I'm like trading nerd hats, baseball, monsters.
Totally. I'm. The basketball season started last week, so I am extremely happy. This is my favorite time of year. Good time for horror movies and for basketball. So I'm very happy these days.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw you were at the Wolves game, right?
Yeah. Yep. Indeed. The first game of the year was a good one. We won the second game, and then we did not play very well in our third game. So we'll see what happens. But I look every single year. I try to be a baseball fan. I'm going to try to watch the World Series and hopefully get a little bit more into it than I am in other years. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, I was going to say, like baseball, basketball is a long season, so it's early yet.
Indeed, yes.
um, so, Matt, how excited are you to like try to take ourselves a bit more, just to polish the podcast, if you will, and like try some new things tonight?
I'm excited. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. I have sort of a new setting. I couldn't do it on my front porch anymore because it's, less than 50 degrees right now. So I had to bring Happy Halloween sign behind me. I'm trying to get like in the mood a little bit. It's not really centered very well, but
I love it.
yeah,
Uh,
it's
speak, yeah. Speaking of the mood, I just have to plug this T-shirt quick, and I'll try to get it in a better light. So everyone watching, or if you're listening, this is the newest Camp Kaiju Halloween-inspired T-shirt. It is a Vampire Dracula thing, so get it. It's on sale now, and the link for that is in the Camp Kaiju bio. You have anything to sell the good people, Matt?
I would just ask people to check out the website phantomlightning.com. It's phantomlightning.com. Reviews and fiction writing on there. That's all I'm pimping tonight. But if anybody wants to check it out, please do.
Awesome. Yeah. So everyone watching or listening, Matt and I are trying to like kind of dig down deep and take the show into a bit more of a maybe a less meandering route. So in the interest of that, I will just speak succinctly here. We're going to talk about the synopsis of the movie. We're going to talk cast, director. We're going to talk about what I'm most excited for Matt to bring to the table is sort of the social context of the movie in the times in which it was made. I think that's really important to talk about. And then we're going to talk about the good, bad, and campy when it comes to this movie, which I think there's a lot on all fronts, honestly. I think it's I think this is a good movie to talk about because unlike the Fly, Cronenberg's Fly, or last week we talked about
Cat people.
Cat People, right? Two movies that I think objectively are classic films that like most people can agree on. And I don't want to be a gatekeeper on this show, certainly not. But with this version of The Fly, I'm excited because I think there are elements that maybe keep it short of true classic status. What do you think?
I should pass my judgment or my verdict right now, but for me, I think it is close to classic status. I had never seen this movie before, to be honest. I saw bits and pieces on TV, and it has a reputation for being campy, so it's right at home on this podcast. But I think it works really well. I think it's a really rich, fascinating movie. I think it's very stylish. It's close to classic status for me. Maybe not quite there. I do think there are a couple things that maybe keep it in the dated category, but I think even that can be a good thing sometimes. So it's close to a classic for me.
For sure. And maybe by the end of our discussion, we will solidify our views a little bit.
Definitely.
Um, so you honestly had never seen this movie before?
Just bits and pieces on TV, and I had seen like the most famous scenes, which we'll probably talk about later.
Yeah.
Away right now. But they're totally different if you watch them in the context of the whole movie from front to back, because I think it actually really does build up a lot of emotional investment, and it like the first half an hour or so, it plays almost like a mystery. You don't really know what's going on, and yeah, I mean, I was surprised how well it worked for me, seeing front to back all the way through this time around.
Yeah. A lot of those are points I will certainly echo when we get there. I, like you, it was like one of these movies where it's like, yeah, I guess I've seen The Fly because I'm sure it was on TV when I was a kid. And and I think this is a real strength of the movie, there are select scenes that are just so memorable. They're just so creative and ghoulish, and you're just like, whoa. And it's certainly as a kid, like it just burns an image in your mind.
Yeah.
So with that said, when I watched the movie, it was basically for the first time.
For me too, yeah.
Yeah.
And I sort of love that. It's kind of cool to like have a movie that's such a like pop culture touchstone that you feel like you know, but then you watch it all the way through and you're like, wow, I really didn't know this movie at all. It's kind of exciting when that happens.
Yeah. So then let's just cover the basics of the movie so people know what we're talking about as we move forward. So The Fly was released in July 1958. It was directed by a German director named Kurt Neumann. It is based on a short story, also called The Fly, that was published in Playboy, actually, in June of 1957. So almost 1 year later from page to screen, which I find extremely fast. It stars, let me get it up, David Hedison. He was credited as Al Hedison, and he plays the lead scientist named Andre, our titular Fly. His wife, Helene
Helene in the movie, yeah.
Yeah. My buddy Philip is on here. Philip, stick around if you want, or catch this later. But it's a great movie. And then Vincent Price actually isn't the quote unquote star of the movie, which going into it I thought he was because he is so synonymous with this movie. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a nice twist. That's like, oh, he's not the Fly. And then let's see. Oh, so it was an immediate hit. Fox Studios greenlit a sequel that came out the next year called Return of the Fly. So it was a good time to be a Fly fan. 57, 58, 59. You were just in Flyland. And then another sequel, Curse of the Fly, in 1965. Then, as we all know, Cronenberg's re-envisioning, I would say, in the 80s. So the synopsis, and this is from allmovie.com by Hal Erickson, states, wealthy Helene is discovered late at night in the factory owned by her husband, Andre. Helene stands beside a huge metal press, which has crushed the head and arm of her husband. Held for murder, the near catatonic Helene refuses to tell anyone, not even Andre's brother, Francois, why she did it. Vincent Price plays Francois. Francois cannot help but notice that Helene reacts in mortal terror when a tiny fly zips through the room, nor can he disregard the statement made by Helene's son, Philippe, that the fly has a curious white head and leg. When Francois pretends that he's captured the fly, Helene relaxes enough to tell her story. It seems that Andre, a scientist, had been working on a matter transmitter, which he claimed could disintegrate matter, then reintegrate it elsewhere. After a few experiments, Andre tried the transmitter tried it himself. Just as he stepped into the disintegration chamber, a fly also flew into the chamber. We aren't immediately shown the results of this, save for the fact that Andre afterward insists upon keeping his head and arm covered. Alone with her husband, Helene abruptly removes the covering, revealing that Andre now bears the head of a fly. There was an exclamation point there, so I had to sell it. His atoms have become mixed up with the fly, and now he is unable to reverse the procedure. Deciding that his transmitter will be a bogey rather than a blessing to mankind, Andre smashes the apparatus and burns his notes. He then instructs Helene via body language to crush his fly-like head and arm in the press. Neither Francois nor Inspector Charras believe the story until, while staring intently at a spider's web in the garden, they see a tiny entrapped fly with Andre's head and arm tinnily screaming, "Help me, help me," as the slavering spider approaches. And then they crush it with a rock.
Indeed.
So, spoiler alert. Sorry, I didn't say that at the beginning. But here we are. Now we're all caught up. The Fly, 1958. Matt, does that synopsis, do you have anything to respond to with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's thorough. That's a thorough synopsis.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I just love the structure of the movie, and I apologize if you were going to get into this a little bit more, but you know, it opens in this like really kind of gruesome manner, a very striking manner, where we see this man crushed in a hydraulic press, and then it plays kind of like a mystery, like I mentioned before, for a good 30 minutes, 45 minutes, where you're like, why does Helene care so much about flies? What actually happened to the scientist? Why does she not really seem to care that she helped her husband commit suicide? It's very, very riveting. And then I think like ultimately, obviously we get to the fly stuff, and that's great, of course, too. But I think the movie does a really good job of like engaging you emotionally, and less like sort of pulling you into the story, because you really have no idea what's going on for a while.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, let's just talk about the good stuff. I thought the movie opens obviously so dramatically. It's interesting, the whole framing device of starting a story with the end and then we go back in time. I'm not always a fan of it personally. And yeah, so with that said, I think it still pulls it off pretty well. Like I said, it starts with a bang, and it reminded me of almost like a Hitchcock movie in terms of its mystery and suspense. And I was like, man, what if he had directed this movie? Just what if? Yeah.
I mean, cool to think about, but I think Kurt Newman does a great job. I know you weren't trying to slight Kurt Newman, but I think he has great visual style, and you're right that he's able to build up a lot of suspense, like the scenes where Andre goes through the device, or when he puts other things, sometimes living things, through the device, are very, very suspenseful. So it's done really well.
They are. No disrespect to the spirit of Kurt Newman, who actually I read died only a few weeks after the release of this film.
I read that too. That's too bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty successful movie, right? So
yeah, he had no idea.
Yeah.
Another thing I think that the movie has working for it in terms of standing the test of time is that it is in color. And I don't say that as a slight to black and white movies. I love black and white movies, but I didn't know this movie was in color. So it just added an extra bit of juice that I was like, oh, cool. Love it.
Yeah, for sure. It looks really great. And I think it has this cool kind of retro futuristic vibe, like what, in 1958 maybe seemed like sort of cutting edge new style or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, like the sort of like neon pulsing machines and like all these sort of like beeping lights in the background, and like these cool goggles that they wear. It's a really kind of like trippy sci-fi vibe. It looks really awesome.
Yeah, in a movie like this, on paper, you actually would expect to be in black and white during this time period. So yeah, it clearly was, Fox clearly put a lot of effort into this movie, and it paid off.
Yeah, definitely.
Matt, can you speak to some of that social context that we alluded to in the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I love so much about this movie is I was surprised that it raised some similarities to Godzilla, the original classic, 1954, by Ishiro Honda. One of the great horror movies or creature features ever made about kind of nuclear paranoia. Obviously, Godzilla in that movie is created from nuclear radiation, and I have to admit it's been a while since I've seen the original Godzilla, but there's also a scientist character who invents this sort of like doomsday device and is grappling with the question of like, should we use it, even though it's, can like let entire civilizations, like, should we use it for this purpose? Certainly a question that was relevant, definitely for Japanese audiences, but obviously for international audiences at that time. So The Fly, made 4 years later, I was surprised, grapples with some of the same questions. And I think there's a really interesting tension between Andre and Helene, the husband and wife, because Andre is obviously a scientist. He believes that men have been, and unfortunately, it is exclusively men in this case, which is too bad. Although Helene's character is very rich and deep and complex, I think, which I'll get to in a second here. But yeah, Andre's character thinks that men have been given the gift of intelligence and scientific advancement by God, and they're supposed to use that gift for progress. Helene is very anxious about this. She says that things are progressing too quickly. She mentions rockets, satellites. I think supersonic flight is another thing that she brings up. She's nervous about this rapid progress and thinks that men are playing God, and that they shouldn't, that it can only lead to destruction. And then her husband sort of brings up, well, television signals are kind of the same way. They're just like, invisible signals that are like brought into our home. Why are you not scared of that? Which I just think is interesting, maybe like a decade or so after television became so prominent in American homes to kind of bring up that comparison. So,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately in The Fly, it does lead to pretty devastating circumstances for Andre and Helene, especially. So what Helene was worried about basically came true, that, Andre was playing God. He was maybe letting his ambition and his scientific curiosity get the best of him. I think the movie does a really great job of sort of, implying that like this is the age that we live in now, when these things can get away from us and lead to our own destruction.
Yeah, I think. Well, thank you, Matt, for all that. That was great. I appreciate that. I think it's. I mean, yeah, I've seen a lot of 50s sci-fi movies where the scientist just like descends into tragedy. But I think is it doesn't veer completely into schlock land like a lot of those B movies do. Like I said, Fox clearly had a vested interest in making this as much of an A picture as possible. And I think that it comes out in the performances. So the guy who plays Andre and Patricia Owens, who plays his wife, they really sell it. They really commit to the drama, the stakes of their situation. It plays as like a domestic drama at times. You forget that you're watching a monster movie. Vincent Price, I love Vincent Price. So interesting enough, this was the movie that kind of turned him into a horror icon, I read. Before this, he wasn't associated with the genre as he was afterwards. So I feel like his performance just personally is kind of tarnished because you're just like, oh, it's Vincent Price. He's just playing Vincent Price. But that's not fair to him. He's doing good work as well. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, he has a lot of nice, sincere moments with Helene. They have really good chemistry, for sure.
And I think it works. Sorry, I hope I didn't cut you off there, but I think it works pretty well because we do have that impression of Vincent Price from movies like the House on Haunted Hill and things like that, where he's kind of like the villain or sort of a menacing kind of campy figure. So I feel like right away in The Fly, we expect that he's in on it somehow, or like he knows what happened and he's not to be trusted. But that's not the case in this movie. And I think it's actually, in a weird way, that, our sort of, what's the word? Our sort of retrospective knowledge of Vincent Price works in the movie's favor,
Yeah, which is so interesting how a movie can evolve over time. And like, obviously, the creators were not even envisioning that, but yet, 70 years later almost, it works in their favor. So I love stuff like that with movies. I wanted to say, and I want to like, what do you think about this? Because I think the um, dangers or the cautionary tale about science is is clear. What do you think about the movie as a critique or subversion of that stereotypical 50s domestic life? Because by the end, I was like, interesting, because this plays like your image of a 1950s home,
Hmm.
very white, middle class, suburban, but it's not. It's got a horrific underbelly. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's something there for sure, and I think maybe we do expect, uh, the character of Helene to be a little bit powerless, or maybe a little bit sort of like just along for the ride, which is kind of how she seems at first, for like when we don't really know what her motivation is, and we know that she's involved somehow, but we don't know how. And then I think her character takes on a lot of complexity because she does push back against her husband quite a bit, even though he kind of does his own thing regardless. And again, it does kind of destroy the family a little bit. I think like the wealth you were talking about, they have this sort of illustrious manner with these like beautifully manicured gardens outside. But as we see at the end, in these beautiful gardens, like a spider web where
Mm.
horrific and disgusting is going on. So like you're absolutely right that beneath this sort of perfect veneer, there's tension, there's fear, and I think it's done really well. I think it's implicit. It's not like the strong theme in the movie, but it's definitely there if you're looking for it.
Yeah, I love this. So already right now, I thought I had a a quote unquote ranking for this movie, but now I'm starting to reevaluate some things. um, yeah, let's move on to some challenges we had with the film, some missteps. Any that come to your mind?
I feel bad because like this movie and the two previous movies that we talked about, every time I'm just like, I loved it. There's nothing bad about it. Uh,
Yeah,
I don't always feel that way about movies, but I do kind of feel that way about the original Spy as well. There's not too much that I think is bad or difficult for me. Um, I think, I think it takes the movie a while to get to sort of its horrific scenes and sort of maybe the campy, fun, silly vibes that maybe we expect from this movie from like what we know about it and the cultural lexicon or whatever. But again, I think that's kind of to the movie's advantage that you think it's going one way and then it spends kind of a lot of time building up the story and the characters. And perhaps this is more in like the camp section, which I know we're going to get to shortly here. So I won't say too much about this right now. I don't think the movie is scary per se, but I do think it has some like iconic images and moments that really stay with you. So I don't have too much to put in the bad category for this one.
no, honestly, I'm the same with you. Like my critiques are just completely personal in that the pacing, like you said, it takes a long time to build up to the big reveal. So it's a bit of a too slow of a burn for me personally, even though I appreciate what is going on in those scenes. Um, and and I just have to put a big asterisk next to that. And my next statement, I wish there was a world where I had seen this version before Cronenberg's. So unfairly or not, I have that comparison in my mind. Where in Cronenberg's you see the scientist on screen like devolving into chaos. In this, it all happens off screen, and I just felt that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think you're right about that. I do think it's interesting that, Cronenberg's remake or re-envisioning follows the Jeff Goldblum character. Like we kind of see the whole, maybe not the whole, most of the story through his eyes. Whereas this one really is through Helene's perspective. And again, there is like kind of that opening where we don't really know what her motivation is. But then it's most of the movie's a flashback from her perspective. And we sort of understand the character of Andre through what he thinks, as well as the character of Francois a little bit. So I was pleasantly surprised that this movie focuses more on her than on the scientists. But you're right that it does kind of make the sort of horrific de-evolution not quite as visceral.
Yeah, but it's a trade-off, right? Because I absolutely agree with you there. I appreciate a strong, compelling woman story. I'd like if we did if we remade The Fly again, how do we blend both of those aspects?
That's a fascinating question. Yeah, somebody should try it.
Oh man. But to Cronenberg's credit, Gina Davis is also strong and compelling in that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned briefly Patricia Owens before, but she's fantastic in this movie, I think.
I think so too, honestly.
Performances to be so good.
Yeah, she carries it on her back.
Yeah.
Um so okay, so like there's a lot of camp in this movie that I'm not sure the producers were going for. And in that sense, like the camp doesn't necessarily age well. To your credit, like to what you said, it's not exactly scary anymore or even mysterious. For example, Andre hides his head and arm in a blanket, and for like almost like a quarter of the movie, he's just under a blanket. It was very silly, and I don't know if they intended that to be silly.
Right. Yeah. And when the hood comes off and we see like the fly face, it's sort of like you just said, compared to the Cronenberg remake, which is like disgusting and gory, and we see his body parts falling off and everything. It's certainly not at that level, but I do think that the original The Fly does set up this relationship between Andre and Helene so well. And then like in this moment, his hood is like ripped off, and he sees his wife, and she screams, and it's from his perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
like fly point of view shot where there are like
Yeah,
dozens of images of her face on the screen. It still works pretty well, even if it's not as horrific as the remake, for sure.
yeah. The reveal I had no qualms with. That was great. And actually, when he's writing on the chalkboard as a way to communicate, honestly, I found that heartbreaking.
Yeah,
And he's writing that the fly brain is taking over. I was like, oh my god.
amazing moment. Yeah, yeah, and I kind of take back what I said a little bit because that moment gave me chills slightly, just a little bit, and like the scenes where he's typing out letters to Helene as well, and they get sort of increasingly like scattered and nonsensical. I wish I remembered what some of them said. I think it was like brain not making sense or something like that. Yeah, moments like that are very weird and pretty dark for especially for this time.
That's the word I was gonna say. Dark. I was like, oh crap. This took a this that it dipped its toes into that pool of darkness that we love about Cronenberg's, and it was just like, oh man, like could you just like go into that pool a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I don't like, I know we're kind of running short on time here, but I think there's a really interesting comparison to the story too. And I haven't read the story myself, but I've read about the story, and the ending of the original short story is very, very bleak. It involves suicide. I don't want to give anything away, but the ending of The Fly is not so dark, but we think that it's maybe leading up to that direction because the character of Helene is about to be institutionalized for madness and presumably found guilty for the murder of her husband. And I just think that theme too of women who are sort of accused of madness when really they're sort of just speaking the truth, they're sort of speaking their story and being sort of locked away so men wouldn't have to deal with them. I don't know if the movie is trying to go for that sort of like cultural commentary, but I think it can be read that way. And I think even the fact that it sort of has like the ending of The Fly sort of has that comparison momentarily is really interesting and kind of yeah, takes the interpretations in different directions possibly.
That is a great point, and you're right. Just to keep time in mind, I do want to. I do. We have to talk about the ending because it's the one thing everybody knows if they know nothing else. I think that ending is the real tragic. That I think that's as tragic as any other moment in the movie because we see his face. It's like that. There he is.
And
What?
right, the spider web, you mean? We see,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's what a weird moment. I mean, you could say that the special effects don't date all that well, but it doesn't really matter. Like it just looks so bizarre. He like doesn't even have teeth anymore, and he's just like this mangled body. And then we have that extreme close up of the spider just coming at you. I mean, yeah, incredible. I mean, I think it works really well.
And right, and you talk about dark. That's another instance because God, I had shivers thinking about being eaten alive.
By a spider. Yeah,
Oh my God, it hits in like a primal place.
yeah. Arachnophobia is like my one irrational fear. So for me, it really it got to me for sure.
Um, so we'll segue into camp real quick. Um, just the one I had to write this down. This was my instant camp moment. So Andre is experimenting on a cat. Think of the baboon in Cronenberg's. In this one, he sends his pet cat Dandelo into space. And I literally mean space. He like hears the cat meowing in the ether, lost forever. And I was like, holy crap. That's hilarious and awful at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I was not expecting that to happen. I knew something bad was going to happen with that cat. Probably not to the extent that it does in Cronenberg's movie with the baboon, but yeah, I was not expecting that. It's kind of like a mind-bending moment. Like, so it's just like cat atoms that are meowing in the cosmos somewhere. I love how weird it is. Yeah.
It's so weird. And it's like, so that, like, this movie, that's why it has like great moments of weird horror and underneath this veneer of normal middle class white America. It's good.
Yeah, it's really good. I loved it. I was blown away. Another piece of camp for me is the kid's performance. I feel like there is just like never a good child performance in any movie from the 50s in Hollywood, but you know, I'll let it slide. That's my only critique of the maybe campy nature of this movie.
I had the same thought. I was like, why is every kid from this era like a Dennis the Menace? Or like, gee, Mr. Smith. Why do they all talk that way?
Yeah, I'm sure it's just like a generational thing, you know, a cultural thing, but it does not date all that well, unfortunately. But
no. All right. What? Go for it.
That's all I was gonna say. That's one minor flaw amongst a lot of good things.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, I think we can get to our verdicts. So, you know, we can go. It's a timeless classic. It stands the test of time. We could say a step lower. You know, it has some antiquated moments, but overall, it's great and stands the test of time. We could say it may be historically significant, maybe some fun moments, but it doesn't stand the test of time. And then our final point could be it's not worth revisiting at all and does not stand the test of time. So where do you fall?
For me, it might have some antiquated moments, but it stands the test of time. I was very, very impressed by this movie. Again, watching it from front to back for the first time, there's a lot to it. It has some iconic moments. Really, really great movie.
Yeah, and see, this is awesome because coming into this, I was lumping it into, you know, it may be fun, but it really doesn't stand the test of time because unfairly or not, I think the shadow of Cronenberg's is so large that I was like, you might be bored watching this movie. Now, after our conversation, I'm going to say it does stand the test of time if you're looking at it like with a real analytical eye and like reading the subtext of everything that's going on. Because when you do that, it becomes so much more interesting than just if you're just going in for like schlock factor.
Totally agree. Yeah. I'm glad we watched this because I've been meaning to give it a chance for a long time, and I was kind of blown away by it. So pretty great stuff.
Yeah, I was blown away by our conversation. So let's plug some things again, and then we can talk about next time, and then get out of here. So Thank you all for hanging out and listening to Matt and I talk about 1958's The Fly. You can check out Camp Kaiju on Instagram and Letterboxd. And on Instagram, you can click the link in the bio to get this shirt. I'm a model as well as a podcast host. That's not true. Matt, you are a writer and critic. Where can we read more of your stuff?
Please check out phantomlightning.com. That's phantomlightning.com. That has a bunch of movie reviews, some writing on there. There's a bit of a novel that I'll have coming out in June 2022 as well. So more info on that to come. But check out phantomlightning.com.
Excellent. And so this marks the end of October's Turn Out the Lights. It's been a blast. Thank you for joining us. Next month in November, Camp Kaiju is going to go back to the basics. We're going to cover some Toho underrated classics. First up, it's going to be the Mothra movie from the early 60s, Frankenstein Conquers the World, a movie called Matango, which I think is about giant mushroom people, and King Kong Escapes. Matt, you're welcome to join on any of those. But we know we've got some bigger plans at the start of the new year.
Absolutely. I look forward to our next conversation whenever it is, and we'll definitely be tuning in whenever I'm not joining in.
Perfect. All right. Have a good night, man. I'll see you later.
All right. You too. Thank you very much.
Bye.